So here's what I'd like to do. Let's take a quick look at the test, and probably half a period-ish, and then I'll get you down to the lab and you can work on the assignment. You can maybe even work on finishing up the test or retaking the test. For those of you that got hundreds or high A's on this, this will be a little boring. But for the rest of you, for the vast majority of the rest of you, this will be really important. So let's take a quick look at. I think I got like the 5 or 6 problems that caused them. The most commonly missed problems. Okay. Here was one of them. Okay, an exact square root. I want to find, or an exact distance. Sorry, I want to find the exact distance between these points. And I think I know one reason people miss this one, and it's not a bad reason. And then another reason is the second reason is people didn't understand how to do it. But one reason I think people missed it is because they tried to simplify the square root, and they got the right answer, but they didn't simplify it correctly. Okay, so we'll talk about that when we get there. So what do? I would recommend writing the distance formula down first, if you don't know it really well. So somebody remind me, and everybody else, what's the distance formula?
X2 squared.
Okay, good. So we're distance formula, we are subtracting the x values and the y values, right?
Plus y2 minus 1.
Good.
Right.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll just plug that stuff in and get an answer. So this ends up being, honestly, I think a pretty straightforward, pretty simple problem once you've done this a couple times. Okay, let's see if you made a mistake, see if you can catch where that was in this process. So if we plug that stuff in here, here are our points. Point A, I'll make these a little bigger so you can see them, is 2, -4. And point B is -1, 2. Okay. Where do those numbers go? Okay, so what would go here? Just tell me what am I going to subtract? Somebody raise your hand and help me out here. Yes, sir.
-1 and 2.
Okay, so -1 and 2. So I could say -1 minus 2 squared plus 2 minus -4 squared. Okay. Now what? Somebody different. What's next? What's next?
Simplify it.
Okay, turn these into numbers. So what about, now this one's easy. What's this one going to be? 6 squared. But what do we do with this one? There's another really common mistake that people are making, despite me having said this about 100 times and gotten tired of saying it. What do I do?
Just make it positive.
Make it a positive. Good. We do not want to make this a negative number. If I make this a negative number, like -3 squared, you have to put it in parentheses, and more times than not, people forget to do that. So the simple solution is just do not make it negative. You know the answer's got to be positive anyway, so always just square the positive instead. That is very good advice, I promise you. If you do that, there's some free points right there. Now and later in this math class and other math classes, you just remember to do that. And then we're just going to turn that into a number. What's 3 squared? 9. 6 squared? What's 6 plus 36? 45. Okay, so our answer then, the distance, is just equal to the square root of 45. Now, I recommend, if you really think you know how to simplify these things well, go for it. If not, you get 90% of the credit by just putting this in. And it's not a bad answer. I'm not just telling you that to try to get you to get more points. That is an exact answer. It's simplifying it is honestly, even in math, it's sort of optional. But that's a correct answer. Okay. So if you turn that into a Moodle answer, are we going to write that? Squirt 45 for 9 out of 10. Now, if you do want to go for the 100%, what do we do to this? I've got to break up that 45 into a product of the biggest perfect square that divides into 45, and then whatever else is left, whatever that multiplies by. So somebody, what's the biggest perfect square that divides into 45? A perfect square is a number whose square root is an integer, right? Yeah, sure. Well, let's put that away. So we get 9 times 5. And so because I started off with the square root of 45, I gotta have the square root of 9 times the square root of 5, and the square root of 9 is what? 3. So the 100% Moodle answer would just be 3 square root of 5.
Wait, how many points is that?
That is 9 out of 10.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So there was one issue. Okay. Here's another one. Point A has coordinates of -1, -3. Let me write these down for you. A little bigger so you can see them. So here's point A. The midpoint has coordinates 7, 3. And what the question is asking, what are the coordinates of B? So let's just call that x2, y2, and I just have to solve for those things, right? What do you think? Well, tell me how you get it. Okay, we'll start with the answer then. And maybe if we know the answer, we can work backwards. What's x2? 15 and 9. Okay. Now, how'd you get that? How'd you get that 15 there? There's really two approaches to this. Austin, what do you do? Okay, good. So we could say the distance from this endpoint of -1 to the midpoint 8 is how much? I mean, to the midpoint 7, sorry, is how much? Is 8. Okay, so I'm going to change by 8 when I go from there to there. So what do I have to do to get to the other endpoint? I have to change by 8. So 8 plus 7 is 15. Okay, so there's one way to do it. So I'm going to get answers of 15 and what else? Well, now, -3 to +3 is a change of what? 6. So I got to change by 6 again. 3 plus 6, 9. Okay, there's a way to do it. That works. That's fine. That's a perfectly valid way to do it. There is an algebraic way to do it that some people prefer, and that's fine. We know that 7 has to be, that's the midpoint, right? The x-coordinate of the midpoint. So 7 has to be the average of the x-coordinates of the two endpoints, right? So we could just write that equation down. In other words, -1 plus whatever x2 is going to be divided by 2. The average of this number and this number has to be 7. So just solve that very simple algebra equation. And the steps are always the same. What do I do first? Yeah, multiply both sides by 2. And then what? Add 1. So there's my 15, right? To get the other part of this, we could set a Garrett not here? Maybe it did. Okay. So let's see. To get the y coordinate of the other endpoint, I know that 3, +3, has to be the average value of -3 and y2. So the same process, right? I could say -3 plus y2 over 2. So the average of those two has to equal 3, +3. Same steps, right? So multiply by 2. And then what? Add 3. So there's my 9. Okay? Make sense? Okay? And this is easier, I would claim. This is a lot easier problem. If you're just finding the midpoint, that's no big deal. Then you're just averaging, right? If I want to find the y-coordinate of the midpoint of this segment, well, that means I'm just going to average these two numbers. that number, and that number, right? Now, how do I do that? Well, let me pull up a graphing calculator. We'll just look at how that works on a graphing calculator. So, okay, so I could just hit 12.7 plus 13.7. Hit enter, so I get that sum, and then what do? Get the average. Divide by 2. So divide, notice it says answer, so it's taking my answer and dividing by 2. There it is, 13.2. Okay? Make sense?
Yep.
So those to me are way easier. All you do is just average 2 numbers. All right. Okay. Very easy, distance formula. This is just like the first one we did. I'm gonna go, rather than do another example, let me just backtrack for a second. All they're saying here, you gotta read the directions carefully, but all they're wanting you to do is get a decimal answer for this. So we would have done the very same stuff we did on this problem, only instead of entering the answer as square 45, we would have turned that into a decimal. So we would have taken this answer right here, right, and just plugged in the decimal. So I just go second, where's square root? Right there. Second square root 45, enter. And now if I'm going to round that, this is another thing people seem to have a little trouble with. If the answer is 6.7082, blah, 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 if I round that to 2 places, what's that going to be? 6.71. I have to go, if I'm going to round it to 2 decimal places, remember, I have to go out to the 3rd decimal place and see if that pushes the second digit up, right? What's the rule? If the 3rd digit is what? I round up. 5 or greater, right? It's 5 or greater, I round up. Right? Okay? So 6.71 would have been our answer on this one. Okay, and then the last couple here are graphing ones. And the point I want to make about these, honestly, these are not hard. But you have to pause and think about the problem before you jump in. I think what people are doing on these is they're just diving into them and trying to get an answer without really thinking about what the equation ought to be that they start with. And that's the key piece. If you start with the wrong equation, you're going to get the wrong answer. The algebra is never going to be hard on these. Now, if you look at this first example up here, it says ray BT. So here's ray BT right there. Right? It says it bisects angle ABC. So this big angle. What's it mean to bisect an angle? Because that's very important. Cuts it in half. So the 2 pieces are equal, aren't they? So I can say this. I know that that angle is congruent to that angle, right? So then what is the equation I set up here? There you go. Okay, so we'll just set this angle AB, the measure of angle ABT, which is 8x minus 16 equal to measure of angle TBC, which is 4x plus 34. And from there, it's a piece of cake. From there, people generally are fine. It's just a matter of isolating x. Now, real quick, what would I do to isolate x here? Go ahead. Subtract 4x. I want to push the x's that way, so subtract 4x. Add 16. So is that 50?
And then divide it.
Divide by 4. There it is. Okay, no big. Now compare that to this problem right here. Okay, the reason that this one is more commonly missed than the one we just did is because what people tend to want to do with this is they just want to set angle 4 equal to angle 5. But is that what's going on there? They might look equal, or they might look congruent, I should say. Measures 4 and 5. Does that mean anything though? No, unless we're told that on the picture, it doesn't mean a thing, because that is not necessarily drawn to scale at all, right? So that's not our equation. We're not doing this. We're not going to say, so the measure of angle 4 is not equal to the measure of angle 5. That's wrong. What What am I doing instead? What is the equation that I know is true here?
Split. No,
You go ahead, I think you're on the right track.
I don't know. Sometimes like,
Well,
you add the other like the other equation.
what do I know about the measures of angles 4 and 5 here? They equal 90, right? They add to 90 because this is a right angle, right? So that one I can take to the bank. I know that's true, right? So I can set up an equation that says the measure of angle 4 plus the measure of angle 5 equals 90, and I'll just substitute what those expressions are. The measure of angle 4 is the expression 2x plus 5. The measure of angle 5 is the expression 2x minus 43. So now I got a simple equation that I know is going to work. Okay? So guaranteed, this is where people made the mistake right there. Okay? So you got to look at the geometry relationship carefully before you make an equation. And then last one is something like this. Now I'll tell you what this person did. This is an actual example off the test. This person did all the math right, but they didn't answer the right question. Okay, what did they do? They figured this part all out. They probably drew a good picture here. They said Q is in the interior of POR. So that's going to give us a picture of something like that, right? There's P, there's O, there's R, and Q is in the interior. So there's Q, right? Exactly. Okay, so we know that measure of angle POQ is x plus 4. We know that the measure of angle QOR is 2x minus 7. And we even know that this whole thing, by something like that, that whole angle is 112 degrees. Right? So what's the equation I come up with? Yeah, good. This guy, right, plus this guy equals 112. So there's the equation, right? So x plus 4 plus 2x minus 7 equals 112. Real quick, if I combine like terms, what do I get? 3x minus 3 equals 112. What do I do next? Add 3, good. 3x equals 115, so x equals 115 over 3, which is what? 38.5, is that right? Is that right? I think so. Yeah, that's right. No, 38.3. 0.3, sorry.
And then you look at it.
Yeah, and look, that's what they got. If we rounded 2 places, right? Now, we don't want to necessarily round it 2 places here. This is what we would get if we rounded to 2 places. I don't want to use a rounded number, though, but what do I have to do with this?
To plug it back in.
I gotta plug it back in. Right, now, I did do one thing after the fact. Just today, I decided, people did that. If they solved for X and they did it right, that's worth something. So I made those worth 50%, and I had Moodle regrade the test. So a lot of you got some points back on that. 5 out of 10 back. But I've got to plug that back in. It wants to know QOR, so I've got to take that value I just found for X and plug it in right there. Okay, but there is one other important thing that I need to tell you that I hadn't even remembered to tell you, but I will now. When I plug this back in, I don't want to use this number. I want to use whatever value the calculator gave me when I calculated 115 over 3. Now let me show you what I mean by that. I go to the calculator. Right, it's gonna make it a big decimal, but I could just enter it as a fraction also. So if I go through and do 115, this will help you in all your classes. If I do 115 divided by 3, the calculator gives me this infinitely repeating decimal, right? And it thinks of that as a fraction, even when it gives me a decimal. So when I want to get a good answer back, when I plug that into my function up here, I'm going to take that and I'm going to plug it in for X by just using this answer times 2, right? Whatever I got for X, I'm going to multiply by 2 and then subtract 7. So I'll just say times 2, it gives me my answer times 2. And I can even hit enter if I want to, and then go minus 7. So that's my actual answer. Okay? If I had used the rounded one, I might have gotten the wrong answer. Okay? Make sense? So I should have put in there instead 69.67 rounded to 2 places. Okay?